Hello, everyone, and welcome to another casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards. I'm a senior world designer who's been working on Lord of the Rings for many years now. And today we're continuing our series of previews for the upcoming Legacy of Morgoth expansion pack. Uh, 2 weeks ago, we did the region of Amberil. Last week, we did Kudzagin. And this week, we're exploring the region of Imhûlar. This expansion pack comes with 4 regions. So we have one more region preview next week. And then the week after that, I think we're going to try to do an instance preview. Not necessarily the gameplay, but walking through the spaces and talking about them a little bit. But for right now, here we are on the edges of lands that we are familiar with from last week in Kudzagin. These are, where the camera is right now is in the easternmost section of Kudzagin. And you're kind of looking out, you see the bridge spanning, and that's your access point into Imhûlar. Um, for those of you that are just joining and have never watched one of these streams before, this is a world design focused stream. So we're going to talk about what goes into building the landscape of Middle Earth. How do we build the terrain, the height map, all of that stuff? How do we decide what a region is going to look and feel like? Even like, how do we decide what we're going to build next? So I'll be able to answer questions about those sorts of things, as well as some stuff about housing, if you have questions about that. However, I'm not going to be answering questions in regards to, game systems. I'm not going to be answering questions about things like lag, PVMP, engineering, basically stuff that is outside of my wheelhouse. I'm not going to be able to answer questions for you. You're better off asking on the message boards or popping into a Cordovan stream when he has a guest that can answer those questions specifically. I also tend to talk a while as I'm working on this. So if you see me and I haven't had a drink in a while, please drop in the chat and let me know to take a drink of water. I got my water, I got my ginger ale, so I am good to go. So with that in mind, let's start our stroll through Imhûlar. As you can see right here, I've got I kind of got my camera detached from me, so we'll fly in a little bit. We don't usually have these controls are a little funky. They are not the usual WASD movement. They're a little bit floaty, and they're kind of meant to provide a little bit of a cinematic presentation for when we have to make trailers and whatnot. But it is not the easiest to control, so we don't typically tend to use oops. And like I said, there we go. So let's snap this onto my character, and we'll start our run across. So like I said, this area is Imhûlar. It is the third region that players will be exploring as part of the expansion pack. And Imhûlar, unlike Amberol, which is kind of this more arid farmlandy area, and Kudzagin, which is our desert and wasteland area, Amberol kind of represents a dead forest, a forlorn forest. Aspects of it are certainly healthier than others, as we'll see as we continue through here. But it is a part of the great forest that covered much of Middle Earth in ages past. Something that's really kind of interesting when thinking about the regions of Middle Earth, particularly the forested ones. You have things like the Old Forest, the Binbul Wood, the forests kind of in and around Mirkwood. You have stuff in Gondor. At one point, all of that was part of one giant forest that spanned large portions of the continent. And over time, as climate has changed and civilizations have kind of come in and left, portions of that forest have gone away. And so now you have just little like drips and draps of it kind of scattered throughout. So let's see real quick if there are any questions. So Nizume asks, is it a forest region? A little bit. Where we're walking around right now is probably the most lush part of it. It is a portion of the region that is kind of abutting the rivers and getting the benefits of being in proximity to those rivers. It's also an area that is probably in our most active development right now. As you can see here, as we wander around up in here, there aren't scene files, there aren't mixed spawns and whatnot. So this is an area that is very much in active heavy development as we speak. So there are gonna be portions of it as we run around that don't look as finished as some of the other regions that we've been into. And this is just kind of part of how our process works. We focus in on one area, we build it, and kind of get it to a good enough point, and then we move on to the next ones. So we've got Amberol and Urashtar and Kudzagin pretty well underway, and this region here kind of represents the last one that we're working on to get ready for the expansion pack. I think part of why we were a little bit more comfortable with having it be kind of one of the last areas that we've been working on is because I think we have a lot of experience building forests, whether they're living forests or dead forests. We have a lot of experience with it, and so it felt like the easiest one for us to build effectively. I think the biggest difference is the kind of treatment that we wanted to give it. Kudzagin needed a lot of extra work just to kind of nail the biomes and whatnot, and the same with Urashtar. We wanted to really make sure that we nailed the look and feel of it. We'll look at Urashtar next week, but here in Imhûlar, we know how to build forests, so we're pretty comfortable with it. Soft Snakes GR says it looks foggy. Yeah, because the intention of Imhûlar is by and large to be this forest in decline, and in other major parts of it, a dead forest. Having fogs and mists kind of help bring some character to it. I think that was one of the things we were actually talking about yesterday, because I was doing some work on the day files for this region. One of the things that I think was important for us was Amberol and Kudzagin. We really wanted to feel like they were the big, broad, open regions, with the huge, broad sight lines and all of that. And I think with Imhûlar and with Urashtar, we wanted things to feel a little more claustrophobic. And there are a couple of different ways you can do that. With Imhûlar, that claustrophobia comes from bringing in the fog a little bit. Taking away those unrestricted views that you had before and making your experience much more focused around you and what you're seeing around you, as opposed to seeing those mountains off in the distance, right? So we're running through. There's definitely I think one of the things that's always been kind of interesting to me too is having had a break from working on Lord of the Rings and doing other jobs, and coming back and taking a look at some of the assets that have come in since then, and seeing just different trees that I hadn't previously had a chance to use before. It's interesting seeing them in place. And we also have some of the trees that were produced as part of the Corsairs of Umbar expansion pack making their way in here too. So we have this kind of interesting variety of trees that feels deciduous but also feels tropical and at sometimes arid, where it's just this mixture that I don't think we've really built forests with this kind of mixture of trees before. Soft Snake GR asks, what does your blue t-shirt say? It says, inconceivable, not capable of being imagined or grasped mentally. Not what you think it means. It was a birthday gift for me from my wife. We are both Princess Bride nerds. Let's see. Nanaris asks, is this the northeastern part of the region releasing with this expansion? No. So Imhûlar is due east of Kudzagin. So we have, and I can bring up the map real quick. So we have our 4 regions here. We have Amberol, Kudzagin, Ureshtar, and Imhûlar. Imhûlar is kind of in the southeast, whereas Kudzagin is to the west, Ureshtar is to the north, and Amberol is to the northwest. So you can see here also as a mark of progress, we're working hard, we're building out our regions. So our region maps are starting to get that kind of feel of finished. I think with Imhûlar being kind of the most in progress of our regions right now, this map will also likely change again as we do like one final pass on our radar images and get a sense for what our overhead maps look like. We'll pass that artwork off to our UI folks, and they'll reproduce. They'll take what we've given them and apply it to the map treatment. So Lev Scotland says, looks nice. Aren't you concerned you'll have too many level 150 regions for the future? So I think one of the benefits that having a cap region beyond, the Corsairs of Umbar stuff and Catacombs is it provides options. This is one of the reasons why I have been trying to champion the concept of things like the fill in the gap regions, because having options is really, really helpful and useful for people who are wanting to play other characters. So I think us having a lot of options at 150 means that, oh, hey, you're rolling up a new character, you want to, play something different, you want to play a different class, you want to play a different race. Having the breadth of that content is helpful, because now you can kind of pick and choose, oh, well, I don't really want to do all of the shield isles, but I can do other areas to kind of get me to that 150 point or get me into those higher area points. When we do eventually release a new level cap, that's going to be especially important, right? Because then you can decide, oh, I am 145 now. The new level cap's 160. I have options for places I can go for content, and I don't have to feel like I'm doing all of it all the same time. You'll do it probably once or twice with like a main character as you're playing through stuff that's already been released, or you're kind of like keeping up with the cap. But when it comes to creating new characters, having those options are great, because you can kind of pick and choose what you want to do, where you want to do, that sort of thing. So right now we're kind of running through the town of Urmach. Unlike most of the other regions, Imhûlar really only has a couple of spaces that are considered hubs. There are going to be a couple camps here and there, but Urmach is the main hub for the town. And there's one other space kind of further to the east that we'll run by that kind of fills that hub purpose as well. But there's not as much for hubs here specifically. In part because one of the story conceits for Imhûlar is, a lot of this property, or a lot of this territory is controlled by Ordak or other nefarious actors. Let's see. Scroll through for a couple more questions while we have a good view. In distance, you can see, and let me bring up the map real quick. In distance, you can see Kuranzar down across the valley from here, which is a city that has been overrun. Players will be doing a lot of stuff in that, just basically from what I've heard from the world designer and content designers that are working in this space. Mythos asks a more development-aimed question. How are you versioning landscape 3D stuff? I mean, you can't commit it into something like Git, do you? So we have a source management software that handles version control for us. So as we do work, It checks out files, locks files so that no one else can check them out and work on them. Most of the time it works well. Once in a while there's a hiccup and we have to have conversations with other people as things collide, but we get it worked out. Um, Nanaris asks, speaking of trees and that, were there any new assets made for Legacy of Morgoth that you particularly like? So we'll probably see some of them. I think less, not as prominent, but in most of these regions because they're kind of not used as heavily. But I'm enjoying the kind of new blocky Shagana style ruins and whatnot that we have. Like those are just, it's always fun to play with a new set. I think my favorite assets that have come with this are the bridges that we started the stream on. We have a few different color variations of those. It's a kind of high arched bridge that we don't really have anymore, and it's a nice, or don't really have at all. And it's a nice. Got to remove those palm branches from the middle of the road. It's a nice kind of break from the very heavy Gondorian causeway bridges, which were what we were using kind of for a while as our go-to when it came to bridge assets, particularly in Gondorian areas, Numenorian areas, and the like. All right. Speaking, so then Yao Deco Demule asks, is there a forest in-game that you would like to totally revamp? Honestly, like, I don't really know that we have very many forests that I would say need a total revamp. Because I think we do a pretty good job. I think there are some forests that I wouldn't mind us trying to figure out a way to better canopy them. And that can be tricky because that adds more assets to the scene and whatnot. So it's not always the ideal option. But that's kind of like how I'm feeling. Is like there are certainly some assets that I feel like are old and kind of chunky and could use a replacement. But as far as completely revamping, I don't think so. I think there are some like in North Mirkwood, Southern Mirkwood, where I feel like the trees don't cover things quite as well as they could or should. And then that goes back to the like really wanting to think about like canopies and whatnot. I think other forest things that I would like to see kind of retouched, retooled. Things like North Mirkwood is very oppressive when you're in that space. So just adjusting things like how dark it gets or the range of the light when you're in those spaces, I think is important. So here we are in the outpost of Vartulin, right? Let's see. Yes, Vartulin. This is another one of the elf groves that are scattered throughout. As you can see, it is, quite constrained compared to what it might have once been. Kind of imagining this grove having been more full and lush than it once was, with only a pocket here and there existing beyond. Scroll down for a few more questions. Love the maps. Is there any way to adjust the map aspect ratio so they aren't stretched? I'm not sure what you mean by stretched. These maps, we don't tend to squish them. The aspect ratio within them is appropriate to the scale of the landscape. If you mean like, if you're talking about how certain screen resolutions and whatnot work on them, I know there's discussion and early work being done on UI scaling and whatnot. I don't have any information or update beyond that, but that might help resolve some of the concerns you have from that comment. Um, Demelsa says, I just want the Woe of the Willow, Old Man Willow, to be put into the landscape Old Forest. Maybe we could talk with Vastin, and he could make the next Angmar and Mordor boss be Old Man Willow that just drops in and houses you. Maybe that could be the next big thing. Um, let's see. The player 5543 asks, will more zones that were previously only a single level, since that was the level cap then, be expanded into more levels, such as what was done with the Great River and Enedwaith? I can't speak to that. That would be kind of more of a game system decision, if we felt we needed to spread things out a little bit. But that's out of my hands. Let's see. Sawsnake GR says, please keep the new hubs minimal and don't add too many NPCs and objects in general so we don't have that much lag. So I feel like that comment is in response to the size of Umbar Baharbel, or something like Minas Tirith. For those of you concerned about, the size of various hubs and whatnot, particularly for this expansion pack, we don't have any big major cities being introduced as part of this expansion. So most of the hubs are villages, or they're set within the ruins of fortresses. So speaking of in development, you can see here, this is the southernmost reaches of Imhûlar, and there's still work being done on the impassable, so you can see this red mark here in the distance. When we're doing development, to kind of know where the bounds of our region are going to be, we tend to paint down things like red lines to show oh, this is the boundary for the region. We'll also do the same before we've done rivers, built rivers and whatnot. We'll take basically a blue marker, a blue highlighter, and draw on our landscape where the rivers are supposed to be. And those are really helpful tools for us to determine where the beginning and ending of a region is going to be. And occasionally, little bits of red and blue make it into the maps or make it into the radar and whatnot, which I'm sure some of you have seen. Let's see. Mario Justum says, those ruins last week looked really cool. They kind of gave me similar vibes itch for Morrowind or Korriban. I think there's certainly themes that carry over across all fantasy. That it's hard to kind of not want to scratch those kinds of itches when it comes to theming and whatnot. All right, let's see what other. Zipfile says, scenario, what's your favorite oatmeal topping? I actually don't eat much for oatmeal, but when I do, you gotta drizzle maple syrup on it. Always gotta add the maple syrup on top. Druid's Fire says, to be honest, this feels like Fornos 2.0, so much with the dead, desiccated trees, though a couple of the wider trees remind me of certain savanna landscapes and trees IRL. Yep. We have the baobab trees, which you can see here in the distance. These are also in development as well. I know Art is working on resolving degrade issues with them. You can kind of see at a distance how some of the branches and whatnot don't quite seem right, but then you get closer and they kind of figure themselves out. But yes, the Fornos vibes are very intentional. I think one of our kind of early game, there are two areas that just have such a moodiness to them, and it's the Barrow Downs and the Fields of Fornost. There is a level of moodiness in those areas that just feels good. It kind of puts you on edge. It makes you a little nervous and anxious, but it also looks really good. And so when we were working on the day files for this, that was one of the things that we had discussed, was wanting to kind of push towards that Fields of Fornost vibe and really get kind of the spooky forest feel, especially since, a lot of the forest is dead, so it makes sense that, spooky forest would have that kind of forlorn cloud hanging over it. I also love these trees here that are just kind of this sprawly, dead, like, you could almost imagine this being a Hjorn walking around. All right, a couple more questions. Let's see. We have from Diark, what is game changing in this expansion pack? Well, I mean, at least what I can talk to, anyways, we have 4 new regions that are being added to the game, which is a big change. It's a lot of landscape. It's comparable to, of the new landscapes that we created for the Courses of Umbar expansion pack and for the Before the Shadow expansion pack. It's a substantial amount of landscape for you to explore and traverse through. So that's what's changing, at least from my perspective as a world builder, as a world designer. That's what's changing. So Manad says, can you comment at this time about the size of the crypts area seen on the map? Is it comparable to the Umbar Moke, bigger or smaller? I'm not sure what you mean by the crypts area. If you're talking about the various crypts and whatnot that are here in Kudzagin, we've got the tombs of Nirgambar, which is not as extensive of a crypt space as Umbar Moke was. Umbar Moke was intended to be a full region of its own with a bunch of just different and interesting things happening underneath it. Any crypts and whatnot that we have here are going to be more focused on dungeon interior experiences, instance experiences. They're not going to be kind of open playable landscape stuff. The landscape areas of those crypts are often going to be monster camps, more so than anything. Are we going to get deadly pools of water? I'm not sure what the plan is for the brackish, still waters in this area of Imhûlar. I'm not sure what the plan is for them. I know sometimes those waters can be, at least in terms of the silence waters, I know those can be pretty annoying to players who might have more song-focused skill sets, and makes playing in those areas a bit challenging. So now we've kind of worked our way around. We went to the south. So instead of, kind of crisscrossing, we ended up going south down through here. We passed up to Tulzakana and to Gat Orca. Now we're working our way back to Kuranzar. So I'm going to go into Kuranzar, I think, and then we'll kind of go northwestish and then back through, and then we'll end our stream at the Bridge of Princes. So Dagger Thief says, nice, so maps and everything is there, but no beta yet. You'll have to wait to hear when we're planning to have our borers. I know that the intention is to have them happen soon, but I could not tell you specifically when to expect borers to happen. That is also not my place to announce. So any announcements for those dates, you'll want to pay attention to things like the message boards, social media posts, to kind of get that information. That and pre-order and whatnot, those are all things that the announcement will come through official sources. Mario Justin says, regarding region borders, how do you handle design / design the inaccessible but visible background landscape?
Things player can see are inaccessible regions so that you avoid emptiness in the distance. I really like the small details like the ship you can see south of Tharbad. So for in general, for distant far terrain, sometimes, like as you can see here, the fog really helps with that. And it helps obscure and allows us to not have to work as high detail as we would um, normally on landscape. I think one of the things we try to do is, we try to keep the height map as interesting as possible at a distance, but we do really reduce the amount of detail painting and scene file work that we do in the distance. So, we give an implication of, what's going on out there, but we don't really do the super fine detail work that we would in a playable space. We can actually talk and show a little bit more of that next week when we get to Urashtar, because there are aspects of that that I actually just finished up some work on that kind of lean towards that question. So maybe we put a pin on very specifically answering that question this week, and come on back next week, and I can talk to you about the work that I've been doing this past week in Urashtar. Um, Purple Opstone says, wait, this is a dev? Yes, I am a dev. I am a world designer on Lord of the Rings Online, here to give you all a preview of what we're working on for the expansion pack. We are in Imhûlar now, the kind of dead forest region of the Valley of Ikorban. All right, so let's head on into Kuranzar now. Kind of run around and explore. I know this area was, we don't do these too often, but this area is, this whole city kind of ends up being a like major monster camp. That's at least the terminology that we used to use in the past. Years ago when we first launched the game, we kind of had this concept of like small, medium, large, major. Small, medium, large, you can kind of get a sense for what those might be. Typically we tend to lean more towards small and medium-sized camps now. And the major camps are these big multi-land block, almost like instance level sized spaces that act as monster camps and act as challenge zones. I don't know that this, a lot of the times in the past, our major camps ended up being, being group spaces. Kuranzar, from my understanding, is not a group space. Urashtar, portions of that are actually intended for group play. But this is meant to be more just of a major camp with a lot of content associated with it. As we're running around and exploring, it has shades of old Numenor, but the Himadi folk have moved in, and now we have cultists kind of taking it over. B-Smith asks, as a world designer, how many years / X packs ahead are you usually thinking about? So we are usually thinking, at least I would say 2 to 3 years in advance at a high level. A general sense of where we're going, what the major story beats are, and kind of where we want to end, right? And then then it like as we think closer and closer in time, the detail of how we're thinking increases. So we might have a plan for where we're going to be in 3 years, and that's very high level. Oh, we know we want to probably hit this region, and these are going to be the major key players in that, and this is how we kind of want that story to resolve. And now we're thinking a year to a year and a half from now, and we're like, okay, more specifically, we're starting to do a little bit of research on the regions that we want to go to, the characters and story arcs that might be involved in that, still at a high level. And then we start thinking, okay, 6 to 9 months from now, what are we working on right now? What planning do we need to do for that? What preparation do we need to do for that? Like the very specific, oh, and now we're building it kind of stuff. So it's kind of like we think multiple years, but closer you get to where we're at right now, the higher detail our thinking and planning is. All right. Sarah Lawn 90 says, when you start your landscape developing process, do you start shaping an aerial view, creating a third-person view? Sounds like it could take a while. So we usually start with a high-level planning map that we try to make be as close to scale um, with our landscape as possible. Once we have that done, once we have that planning done, we then start thinking about, okay, now we can break it down into smaller spaces. We start, hitting the landscape with just high level markers to kind of call out where different areas and portions of the map will be. After that, we kind of hit it with a combination of map development in Photoshop, height map development in Photoshop, and using a tool called World Machine to kind of do our broad, big layout. And that will help us get the things like major geographic features in place, get the landscape using kind of more realistic weathering effects and whatnot, so we can get the height map in. And then it's kind of a lot of back and forth cycling between, our landscape design tools and Photoshop and World Machine, and kind of just going through all of them until we get a base height map that we look at and go, yes, okay, we like how this looks, we like how this feels. Even though we don't have textures on it, we can kind of see the light hit it, the shadows hit it, and we can get a sense for like, yeah, great, okay, awesome, that feels good, or this doesn't feel quite right, we need to like take this feature back, the erosion lines in the terrain, for example, might not be quite what we want, so we can bring it back into Photoshop and World Machine and do some editing there, and then we can import all of that into World Builder. I've been really trying over the last several years to look at how the landscape workflow is for our product, for Lord of the Rings Online, and look at how other engines and handle their landscape pipeline, their workflow from basically paper design to in 3D engine, and trying to find ways that we can incorporate processes and methods used by those other engines, those other products, to both better improve what our landscape looks like, and also accelerate how we build our landscape. Which is it's fun, it's engrossing efforts. Is the texture of the flagstone here a new texture? I'm not sure, because I'm just seeing this question. I don't quite remember the context and what that's in relation to. We do have a little bit of old, a little bit of new as part of this expansion pack, so I'm sure there's some stuff that is, either upcycled or recycled texturing, and there's some stuff that's brand new texturing as well. Sierra Nanor says, can you please tell us about the instances and raids? So our expansion plan has 4 instances coming with it, 3 of which should be available at launch, and 1 which will be coming later on. We have a 3-person instance in Amberil. We have 2 6-person instances, 1 in Kudzagin and 1 in Imhûlar. And we have 1 instance in Urashtar, which is our raid, which will be the one that comes out a little bit later. Part of the reason why we divvied up the instances across all 4 regions the way we did is because we were thinking about, how this is a fun view. Let's see if I can get a little bit closer. We were thinking about how the original game worked and how instances in the original game worked, and how kind of, starting with Breland, we kind of had a like end capped instance in each region that kind of
put a bow in the storylines for that region and allowed you to kind of feel like you'd finished the region and move on. So we had things like, the Barrow Downs that kind of wrapped up a lot of storylines and plot threads from the Breland experience. We had, I'm gonna have to fix this land block. We had, the Red Swamp, which kind of capped off the Lone Lands. We had the city of Fornost, which capped off, the North Downs. Angmar had all of its instances. You had Misty Mountains, which had Helagrod. So we were kind of thinking about that and thinking along the lines of like, okay, well, can we do something like that for here? Can we use instances as kind of storytelling capstones for each region? And I think that's in general kind of where we're leaning. Like we want to provide that kind of similar experience where you feel like you're ending your region as you get to the instances and you're ready to move on. Manadler says, will the Stable Masters have the new mount type previously discussed? So one of the things I'm working on right now is getting the Stable Masters using a kind of Umbar Ikorbani themed set of horses. You won't be using the non-horse mount as part of the Stable Masters, at least as far as the human Stable Masters go. That might change for things like the Kinta later on if we do add Stable Masters to their specific locations. But right now, no. The new animal type for mounts is not going to be part of the Valley of Ikorbon stable network. All right. Purple Opstone says, and I apologize again for butchering anyone's name. Do you have a favorite class? So my classes of choice tend to vary. When the game first started, I really loved Burglar, and Burglar was my main. Then for a while, when I came back to working on Lord of the Rings, Guardian was my main for a while because I was duoing with a friend of mine who was a runekeeper. And not too long ago after that, I switched over to Bjorning, which I really thoroughly enjoyed because it was kind of a jack of all trades sort of class. And now I'm playing Mariner on the Legendary Worlds, kind of experiencing the Veil of the Nine. Deltogi says, love how this area is more gray and lifeless, less colorful than the previous ones. I think it's a good contrast to have both in an expansion and bring some new environments. Yeah, I think, this area is certainly one of the more familiar feeling, like old world familiar feeling regions, because it's much more of a classic, classic region in terms of its biome design and whatnot. Urashtar, Kudzugin, those both had brand new world building challenges for us. And Amberol was like kind of an extension of what we've done in what we've done on the Cape of Umbar already. But since I didn't have the opportunity to work in the Cape of Umbar because I was working mostly exclusively on Outer Gondor for the Corsairs of Gondor expansion pack, it was new to me, and it was a new opportunity to play with a set of tools, basically, that I hadn't played with previously. So let's see. Lev Scotland asks, how many months to create all of the landscape for an expansion like this from zero to finish? So I would say we probably hit pre-production for this particular set of landscape maybe about this time last year. We usually start pre-production for an expansion pack, the high-level conversations and planning for what's going to go into it about a year before. I think our component of it is very
minimal in comparison to other teams where it's like we basically just have to be like, where are we going to build this? We're going to build this here. Great, that's what we're doing. I think other teams certainly have bigger, more detailed things that they need to figure out for an expansion pack, at least in for long-term planning, than what the World team has. And apologize as well if I'm a little like stuffy and whatnot. I have my booster shots earlier in the week, and I'm still dragging a little bit from those. So yeah, I feel like that's that's about where we're at as far as how long it takes us to kind of go through and build everything. And that's not to say that's the only thing we're working on over the course of the year. As we're pre-production for an expansion pack, we're also in pre-production and or active development for any number of the other number of other updates that are happening throughout the year. Some of them have more need from World, some of them have less. So yeah, it varies. All right. Nanara says, are there any updates on talks to fix some of the buggy water that happened after the Corsairs of Umbar expansion? For that, like with so many other things that you may think or looks like or feels like a bug, please file a bug on it through our bug system. It's not. I'm not saying this to be dismissive of anyone, but we have very full plates, and we are not always able to either remember, one player asking about a bug that needs to be fixed, or we're not able to, find the time for it immediately, and because of that, it kind of falls out of the way. Whereas if we have it in our bug system, it will eventually come to one of us, and we can eventually look at it. So I do wholeheartedly encourage people to use that system. Even though it may not be the most ideal system out there for reporting bugs, it does guarantee that bugs will get to it. Bug reports will get to us. So I'll run back this way a little bit because I want to explore in here a little. I haven't actually been I haven't been to this space before, so it's interesting to turn around and check out places that you've never been in before. Let's see. Nanara says the sand texture looks really nice. Is this a new one? I think we actually had maybe a dozen, probably like a dozen to 15 new sand textures for the terrain that were introduced as part of Corsairs of Umbar. And that's a lot of different textures. And I don't think we used a lot of them in the building of that expansion pack. So it's an opportunity for us to kind of, where am I? It's an opportunity for us to kind of go through and kind of reuse things that haven't been used too extensively yet. All right, well, let's start. Looks like the sun is starting to set a little bit here too, which is nice because we're getting some of the more interesting effects going on in the sky right now, which that looks great. I'm enjoying how that looks. So Sino TV says, just tuned in. Where are we currently? We are currently in the very eastern portions of the region of Imhûlar in the Valley of Ikerban. Imhûlar is kind of the forested region in which, for the expansion pack, in which most of it's dead or dying. Super, super happy vibes in this region. But really cool sunsets. I actually, not too long ago, maybe last week I think it was, got all of the housing day file items set up and ready to go off to test, which was nice to be able to put a cap on that.
Invisible Cup says Umbar expansion is one of my favorite. I couldn't believe the size of Umbar Moak and how each region within it is so different. I can't wait to see the continuation of the story. Yeah, I think one of the things that was really satisfying to me with Umbar Moak was how we were able to uh, make each section of it kind of have its own distinct character, but also have elements that progressed between the regions so that it felt like they were all part of the same thing while all having their own unique character to them. Um, I was really happy with how that turned out. It was a headache trying to get it to be performant, um, just because of the amount of decorative detail that we had to put into it. Made it a little chuggy initially, and we had to do a lot of work to optimize it. But I'm really happy ultimately with how it all turned out. I am drinking, as I was told to. So Diark says, when you play Lotro, are you in normal mode or God mode? When I play Lotro, I play on a incognito non-admin character. Um, I really enjoy being able to actually like play the game and not feel like any sort of admin abilities are getting in the way of that. Admins are useful for testing, but if I'm gonna play on a live world, I play on my own account that is not an admin account, just so that I can have an actual real play experience. Suno TV says, I have a completely unrelated request slash wish or question. Please change the spawn times for the rare mobs in Sarner. The rare mobs in Sarner are a kind of sore subject for me because they were originally something that I had set up and built. Um, I years ago the rare monster system was something that I kind of took and ran with and tried my best to make be something interesting and compelling as just an extra surprise on the landscape, not necessarily making it something that players felt like they had to do. And then we added deeds to killing rare monsters, and I've never been a real big fan of that because it can be really frustrating to see that you have kill all of these targets, but they only show up X amount of time, and if you get there right as someone else has found it, like you kind of lose out on it, and it's never a really feel good experience. And I would like to change those deeds into something different at some point in the future. Whether or not we'll be able to, or if it's even worth doing that, that's a different question, and that's a conversation to have with other designers to kind of see how we feel about it. I will say that with each new region that we add, I try to advocate for not putting rare targets into the deed log because very often that just means those deeds sit there. And I'd much rather, if someone's going to be deeding on something that they can reliably complete, whether it is through a number of kills or knowing like, oh, hey, if it's like a seasonal deed or something, knowing like, hey, I made this much progress, but it will be back, so I continue working on it another time, rather than kind of being at the whims of the landscape RNG and just your own time and availability to try to complete a target deed. Grodin Grodin asks, pyramids. Tell me there are pyramids against the backdrop of those red sunsets, and that would be an awesome new skybox. That would be beautiful. There are no pyramids in this region. Some things get a little zigguratty, but not a classic pyramid. We are coming very close up to the border of this region, and surprisingly, I have made it through a region with time to spare. That doesn't happen too often because even at my very non-casual casual stroll pace of Run 2.0,
Um, I usually never get through a region in time. But what we can do is we'll park ourselves up here and enjoy the sunset while I answer a few more questions. This will be the kind of starting point for us next week. We'll be going into Urishtar here to the right next week. Um, but we'll hang out here. You can see Kurenzar there in the distance, which has structures in it that are in deference to Sauron and the Church of the All-Seeing Eye, or the Lidless Eye. I forget what exactly we're calling it, but so Pow2908 asks, scenario, what is your favorite part of the process of creating a new region? I really like the broad swath stuff. Um, like taking a look at the planning maps that our lead has produced and kind of taking them and using them to build the high level height map and then using our tools to at a high level paint down our scene files and whatnot. That's really engaging for me. I kind of like that very high level stuff. My least favorite thing to do, honestly, is decorating towns. I hate decorating towns so much because you there's always this, and I run into this when I'm playing video games too, where it's just like you feel like you've spent enough time in a space and you're ready to move on. And I kind of feel like that with towns, where it's like I can get the layout down, but then like going super detailed deco always just is a little bit mind numbing for me. Um, I still do it because we want to make sure the towns look good, but it's always one of those like, oh, can I just finish this and move on to doing like bigger, broader things? Can I finish this so I can go work on a dungeon or build, do high level painting and whatnot? Like the high level stuff just feels really good to me and I really enjoy it. So let's see if I can get up a little bit higher so we can kind of see night turn into, or day turn into night, and get the stars coming in as well. Um, let's see. Hoyabella says, is the saying "a game goes gold" still used when a lot of games are digital? I think the phrase still comes up once in a while. Internally, we talk a lot more in terms of things like branches, release candidates, builds, and whatnot, and not necessarily specifically saying the game has gone gold because, like you said, the terminology "game has gone gold" meant that your data was all done, your executables and all the data for the game are done, and they were printed onto a gold master CD, which would then be used to make all the other copies of the game or the music CD or software that was being produced. Um, so Nanara says, I remember someone on the team mentioning how sand textures might be difficult for Lotro, but it turns out real beautiful here. Almost looks good as Sworder's sand textures. I'm on. Nicely done. Well, thank you. I think any type of new terrain comes with challenges of learning how to use those textures. Urishtar, there was a set of textures that were produced for that it took me the better part of a week to really figure out the right way to kind of use those textures because they were they were meant to kind of be used in multiples, like overlaying on top of each other, but we don't have tools to really allow us to select and paint in multiples in a very easy way, which then led to me thinking about like what kind of requests could I make from our tools team to make this kind of painting easier, especially if we're going to be continuing to author textures that are intended to be overlaid in certain ways. Um, let's see. Mario Justin says the distance vistas of all of these ruins look really pretty in the skybox. I think one of the things that's always important for us is to make sure that we have interesting silhouettes in the distance to kind of draw your eye towards something. And having, at least in an area like this where you have a very defined horizon line, having those assets in the distance, in the horizon, really, really do make them stand out and make them feel impressive. Um, so we are almost out of time. So I'm going to wrap up a few more questions and then we'll call it a night. Druid's Fire asks, "Are these the new day files you've been working on?" Yep, we're seeing them now. I very specifically added them to my data, my local data before today's stream, so that we could make sure that the new day files were in, so that I could show them off here. Um, Yao asks, is it difficult to play the game you're working on? I mean, can you actually do a quest without looking at a tree and wondering if you should change that old texture? That is definitely one of the challenges to playing a product that you work on. But I also find as a game designer, it's also a challenge to do that with any game. It can be hard to play a game and not be analyzing it and critiquing it while you're playing it. And you kind of have to, like, if you want to play something for the thrill of just playing it, you kind of have to try to force yourself to shut off the analytical part of your brain, because otherwise you'll spend more time analyzing what you're playing than enjoying what you're playing. With Lotro, it's very much that, where it's like I have to, like, I will make notes for myself if something is egregious enough for me to really remember it. But in general, I kind of have to just, like, set aside, like, if I am not intentionally doing a playthrough for note gathering, I kind of have to set aside my game designer brain and just let myself exist in the game and enjoy the game and have fun in the game. Invisible Cup says, when is the next Cave Troll stream? Those are very enjoyable. I was actually talking with Orion about that this morning. He and I have a couple of ideas for when good timing for that would be. We got to talk with Cordovan about that. And then once we kind of have that nailed down, I'm sure we will let you all know, and that will get added to whatever streaming schedules that we have available publicly, as well as part of announcements that we make on the message boards. All right, so I feel like we are past 3 o'clock, and we're at a really good stopping point now. So I think with that in mind, we'll leave you with this wonderful evening shot looking out across Imhûlar. Thank you everyone for attending the stream, asking your questions, and coming along for the ride as we preview this region. Keep an eye out on the message boards and on social media for announcements regarding things like the first bull roars when they become available, as well as anything that is associated with our pre-release and pre-order offerings. I would imagine those are going to be happening sooner rather than later, but I don't have a specific date to let you all know about. So just keep an eye out for those. In the meantime, we will be back here next week to preview the final region of our expansion pack in Urashtar. And then the week after that, we'll be doing kind of an instance preview walkthrough of the various instance spaces and interiors that are coming along with the expansion pack. So thank you everyone for being here today, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week. Have a great afternoon, everyone.